Welcome to Kindness Tales USA, where real stories of courage, responsibility, and humanity remind us that a single choice can quietly save countless lives. Today's story is about Captain Daniel Hayes, a man whose intuition, experience, and moral courage would prevent disaster, protect hundreds of lives, and preserve hopes that would otherwise have been lost. Captain Hayes had spent over 25 years in aviation. While his technical skills and discipline were impeccable, his greatest strength lay in his understanding of responsibility and intuition. He knew that numbers and instruments were essential, but so was listening to the quiet voice inside, the one that senses what the instruments cannot yet measure. On the morning of this flight, everything seemed ordinary. Weather reports indicated clear skies. Aircraft maintenance logs showed no faults. Passengers boarded with calm expectation, unaware of the subtle challenges the day would bring. It was meant to be routine, ordinary, uneventful, a simple transcontinental journey that would end without incident. Yet, life often intervenes in quiet, unnoticeable ways. A small warning light blinked on the cockpit panel. It was subtle, minor, and easily dismissed by most pilots. But Hayes recognized it as an anomaly, a hint that something beneath the surface required attention. He studied the readings, reviewed system checks, and requested updated information. Everything suggested normal operation, yet his intuition remained uneasy. For 2 hours, the flight continued smoothly. Passengers read, slept, spoke quietly, or simply observed the vast sky beyond their windows. Among them was a young girl, Maya, traveling to reunite with her father after a long year of separation. Her mother held her close, unaware that the success of their reunion depended entirely on the judgment of the man guiding the aircraft. Hayes' co-pilot noticed his concentration. "Captain, all systems are fine," he said. "I think we can continue as planned." "Yes," Hayes replied, "but something tells me we shouldn't. Here is the essence of leadership and responsibility, acting before the consequences are visible. Acting when fear and caution collide, yet choosing the path that protects others." Hayes' mind weighed every possibility, every potential outcome, considering the unknown variables that instruments could not measure. Finally, Hayes made the decision to divert to the nearest airport. He informed air traffic control of his request. "There is no confirmed emergency," he said, "but I sense one approaching, and I cannot ignore it." Air traffic control hesitated but ultimately approved the priority landing. It was an unusual request, one based solely on intuition and experience, not measurable data. Yet Hayes' calm, methodical reasoning inspired confidence, even in uncertainty. Minutes later, the aircraft's right engine began showing severe signs of stress. A critical component had fractured internally, invisible to instruments until it reached a dangerous threshold. Had Hayes continued on the original route, failure would have occurred mid-air, far from any safe landing location. The consequences would have been catastrophic. The aircraft landed safely. Passengers were unaware of the narrow escape. Maya clutched her mother's hand, tears of relief forming as their journey continued uninterrupted. Families were preserved, dreams intact, and futures secured, all because of a quiet, unseen decision. Engineers later confirmed the rarity of the fault. It was nearly undetectable and would have gone unnoticed until it was too late. Only Hayes' judgment, trust in his intuition, and moral responsibility prevented disaster. Captain Hayes did not view himself as a hero. He saw only the fulfillment of responsibility. The story demonstrates that heroism often exists in silence, unrecognized by the world, and that true courage is quiet, moral, and invisible. This story reminds us that life is preserved in the moments we listen to the small, quiet warnings, the whispers of intuition, and the responsibilities we choose to honor before consequences appear. One single, thoughtful, and moral decision can safeguard hundreds of lives, hopes, and futures. Without recognition, without applause, yet with profound impact. Captain Hayes understood that flying was far more than controlling an aircraft. It was about the responsibility carried silently, invisibly, over hundreds of lives. Each decision, each judgment, even those unrecognized by the world, could ripple outward, shaping lives, preserving futures, and safeguarding dreams that had not yet fully formed. As the aircraft descended toward the alternate airport, Hayes reflected on what it truly meant to be responsible. Responsibility is rarely applauded. It is measured not in recognition but in the quiet certainty of acting rightly, even when others may not understand. Every passenger, every family, every individual depended entirely on choices that no one else could see. Hayes' mind wandered briefly to Maya, the young girl on board, and her mother. He imagined their hope, their longing, and the quiet anxiety that accompanies a reunion delayed for months. He understood that these personal stories, invisible to him yet deeply real, were intertwined with his decisions. Each small thought, every subtle calculation, was a thread holding together fragile human lives. He considered the broader nature of courage. True courage is rarely visible. It does not announce itself in applause or recognition. Instead, it exists in the silent moments when one chooses responsibility over convenience, intuition over certainty, and moral duty over personal comfort. It is courage enacted quietly, measured not by accolades but by impact. Throughout the descent, Hayes reflected on the nature of fear. Fear is an instinct meant to protect, yet courage is the act of acting rightly despite fear. Often, the greatest acts of courage are not dramatic. They are unseen, internal, and moral. They are the decisions made in anticipation of what might happen, rather than reaction to what already has. The passengers continued their journey unaware of the invisible crisis narrowly avoided. Each carried private thoughts and personal stakes. There were parents anxious about children, colleagues traveling for important meetings, travelers anticipating life-changing reunions. All of them depended on Hayes' judgment without knowing it. Hayes realized that leadership extends beyond authority. It is measured in moral courage, in foresight, and in the willingness to trust experience and instinct when conventional data seems sufficient. Leadership exists in the quiet, internal decision to act rightly, even when external validation is absent. Maya's mother, sitting quietly, had no idea that her daughter's safe journey was being determined hundreds of feet above the ground by a man whose internal calculations and moral compass intersected at a critical point. She worried, as all parents do, about what she could not control. Yet her worry was irrelevant to the outcome, because Hayes' responsibility and attention were active, deliberate, and entirely committed. As the aircraft landed safely, Hayes reflected on the unseen weight of his choice. Hundreds of lives had been preserved. Dreams remained intact. Families would reunite. Futures would continue, uninterrupted. And yet, the magnitude of the decision would remain largely invisible. He thought about the rarity of such judgment calls. Machines can measure pressure, temperature, and vibration, but they cannot anticipate subtle failures that manifest internally, without warning. Human judgment, experience, and moral awareness are necessary to interpret these silent signs and act before disaster occurs. The story of that flight is a reminder that moral courage and responsibility are not about recognition. They are about honoring trust, anticipating consequences, and acting when the outcome cannot be guaranteed. Heroism is not always celebrated. Often, it exists in quiet moments, in decisions unseen, and in the ripple effects that only manifest later. Captain Hayes did not see himself as extraordinary. He saw only the fulfillment of duty and moral responsibility. Yet the lessons from that day transcend the individual. They illustrate universal truths. That intuition and experience matter, that responsibility requires courage, and that quiet actions often have the most profound impact. This story also reflects on human interconnectedness. Every passenger, every child, every adult on that flight had lives, stories, and hopes that were preserved by a single choice. Each person's existence was influenced by invisible forces, unseen yet powerful. Life, in essence, depends on these quiet intersections of responsibility, foresight, and moral courage. The aircraft's arrival marked only the beginning of reflection. While passengers celebrated their safe landing, the deeper implications of Hayes' decision, his silent heroism, would remain largely invisible. This is often the nature of true courage, unseen, uncelebrated, yet infinitely consequential. Captain Hayes' actions remind us that responsibility is not just about reacting, it is about anticipating, reflecting, and acting morally when consequences are uncertain. It is the quiet force that preserves life, maintains hope, and upholds the interconnected fabric of human existence.